6:12 a.m., Skyport International Airport, New York. Amidst the rush of passengers dragging suitcases, a young woman pauses beneath the soft light of dawn, holding a first-class ticket, seat 1A, on a Ryanair flight OA210. No one knows who she is. All they see is brown skin, a plain black suit, no jewelry, and eyes that don't ask permission to claim a seat that is rightfully hers. What they don't know is that just a few hours from now, the entire first-class cabin will be forced to rise, not to give up their seats, but to take a hard look at themselves. Skyport International Airport, 6:04 a.m. The first light of dawn cast a golden hue across the curved glass terminal, reflecting off the polished floor where hurried footsteps echoed. The PA system called for final boarding, but amid the rush, one figure moved at a different pace, slow, steady, unshaken. That was Amara Collins, 26 years old. Dressed in an unbranded black suit, her hair tied in a neat, low bun, she rolled a small navy suitcase, scuffed and worn. In her other hand, she gripped a first-class boarding pass, seat 1A, on a Ryanair flight OA210. That ticket wasn't just a gateway to Los Angeles, it was a symbol of a decade spent pushing through doubt, poverty, and racial bias. She had once washed dishes in Brooklyn, brewed coffee at 4 a.m. while studying for the GMAT. She had lived in a 10-square-meter room with no windows, sharing a kitchen and bathroom with 4 strangers. She had been turned away from dozens of opportunities simply because not enough experience. Or we're looking for someone who's a better cultural fit. No one ever asked her what fit meant, but she knew, deeply. At the entrance to the priority line, a security officer glanced at Amara, his eyes briefly flickering in surprise at the sight of a first-class ticket. He said nothing, just checked her ID, twice. In Amara's mind, her mother's voice echoed, gentle but unbreakable. "You can walk into any room, so long as you got there with your blood, your sweat, and your integrity. Don't let anyone make you believe you don't belong." She tightened her grip on her bag strap and lifted her head. Her eyes scanned the board above. Orion Air Flight OA210, New York, JFK, Los Angeles, Gate B12. Boarding begins in 15 minutes. This wasn't just a flight, it was the first milestone after a journey many hoped she would abandon halfway through. In Amara's bag was a multi-million-dollar contract. If today went well, her startup, Novagenics, would become a strategic partner to a global medical conglomerate. She was no longer just the young black girl. She was the founder and CEO of a biomedical tech platform now valued in the tens of millions. As she reached the frosted glass doors leading to first class, Amara paused for one brief second. She looked at her ticket again, almost like saying to herself, "I made it here. Not because of luck, but because I refused to step back, even when the world tried to push me out." And then, with a calm breath, she pulled her suitcase forward into a space that for years people had silently signaled, "This place isn't meant for someone like you." First-class cabin, Orion Air Flight OA210. The scent of genuine leather, Arabica coffee, and luxury perfume lingers in the air. The wide reclining seats are divided by frosted brass-trimmed partitions. Most of the passengers are already seated, primarily middle-aged men in tailored suits, women with Rolex watches, and neatly placed Hermes bags by their feet. Amara Collins steps into the cabin, her ticket marked 1A held firmly in one hand. A few heads turn toward her, eyes flickering first with surprise, then quickly shifting to evaluation. Too young. Probably someone from PR. Nobody flying first class brings a suitcase that beat up. Amara doesn't respond with a glance or a smile. She simply walks slowly to seat 1A, lightly touches the armrest, as if reaffirming this seat is hers. Then she sits down, shrugs off her blazer, fastens her seatbelt, and gazes out the window. Outside, the New York sky is still steel grey, but inside her, the sun has been shining for a long time. From her bag, she pulls out a stack of documents. The partnership contract between Novogenics and Meditron Corp. A turning point not just for her company, but for every young person of color trapped by the same biases she once endured. Her hands tremble slightly, not from fear, but from clarity. Sitting in seat 1A wasn't just about flying first class. It was sitting in a place society once told her she'd never reach. An older female passenger walks past, glancing at the name printed on Amara's ticket. Then at her face, brown-skinned, young, no makeup, no wedding ring, traveling alone. Her eyes seem to ask, "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Amara smiles politely, saying nothing, not bowing her head, not apologizing for existing. She's long been familiar with that look, since high school in a mostly white district. Since the job interviews where they said, "Your resume is impressive, but not quite the cultural fit." Since the boardrooms where she was the youngest and the only one not asked for her opinion. But today is different. She leans back into seat 1A, lifts her chin, and lets one quiet sentence echo in her mind. Sit down, like you belong. Because you paid every price to be here. The morning sunlight filters through the window, casting a soft glow on her cheek. A small halo for those who fought in silence and who are about to confront an old guard not yet ready to let go. 7:45 a.m., first-class cabin, Orion Air Flight 0210. The sharp sound of high heels echoed rhythmically against the veneer wood flooring of the aircraft. Each click, clack landed like a gavel, striking the polished silence of the elite cabin. The door to first class opened. Two women entered, one tall, one short. One exuded authority, the other sharpness. The first was Victoria Langford, 55 years old. Perfectly curled blonde hair, an ivory white suit, a teal Hermes scarf. She was the CEO of the prestigious Langford Estates restaurant chain, one of Orion Air's original Platinum Elite clients, who had occupied seat 1A for 2 decades, virtually unquestioned. Walking beside her was Caroline Pierce, her longtime assistant and closest confidant. A beige trench coat, dagger-like eyes, a small black clutch tucked under one arm, containing her schedules, schemes, and a quiet arrogance. Victoria's eyes swept across the cabin. The glance she gave other passengers was perfunctory, until she stopped. Seat 1A, a young black woman, dressed simply, a scratched suitcase beside her, sitting there, composed, upright, as if she belonged. Victoria's gaze darkened, cold, hard, as though she'd spotted a stain on a silk handkerchief. Caroline followed her gaze. She tilted her head, let out a small whistle, as if witnessing a breach in the natural order. No one spoke, but the air shifted, from still to suffocating. Victoria leaned slightly toward Caroline, her voice low but intentionally loud enough to be overheard. "Perhaps there's been a mistake. That seat is usually for priority members, not just anyone." Caroline nodded, replying just as quietly, "Doesn't look like someone who belongs in 1A. A few passengers turned their heads. their gazes no longer neutral. Now they were appraising, recalibrating social hierarchy, scanning for justification to exclude. Amara could feel it. Every current in the cabin had changed direction. No one had said her name, but every glance seemed to ask, "Who are you to be here? Did you get on the wrong flight? Who gave you the right?" She didn't flinch, didn't bow her head. She simply buttoned her blazer, smoothed the contract on her lap, and resumed reading as if no one else existed. But inside, her heartbeat began to slow, not out of fear, but from the calm before a familiar war. Victoria began to walk toward her. She said nothing, but her eyes, sharp as blades, swept over Amara like a razor. They assessed the softly curled hair, the worn tablet, the unbranded belt. In that gaze there was everything: suspicion, disapproval, and an unspoken command to disappear. A young flight attendant passed by, offering Victoria a mechanical smile and a nervous glance. Everyone knew Victoria Langford was the uncrowned queen of first class. One call from her could have an entire crew reassigned. Caroline nudged her subtly, eyes still locked on Amara. "Shall I call the chief steward?" Victoria gave a slight smirk. "Not yet. I want to see how she reacts." She, just one word. Yet it summed up an entire system, placing Amara on trial. Not for a crime, but for existing in a space they believed was theirs. Deep within Amara's eyes, stillness on the surface, but an undercurrent beginning to rise. This wasn't her first time facing this kind of treatment, but this time she wouldn't stay silent. 7:49 a.m. First-class cabin, Orion Air Flight 0210. The air in the cabin seemed to drop a few degrees. The light streaming in from the windows was no longer warm enough to chase away the growing tension weaving between the rows. Victoria Langford had lost all patience for observation. She strode straight to seat 1A, standing tall, her figure casting a shadow over Amara like a wall of power. Her voice was steady, refined, but icy. "Excuse me, but I believe you're in the wrong seat." Amara looked up, her gaze calm, her voice soft, yet anchored like a steel spine. "I don't believe so, ma'am." Caroline Pierce, Victoria's ever-present shadow, stood just behind her, arms folded, wearing a smirking, condescending smile, as if watching a freshman challenge a tenured professor. Victoria continued more slowly this time, deliberately emphasizing each word. "Seat 1A is the one I always book. I'm a Platinum Elite client. The crew must have made a mistake. Would you mind switching to another seat? 3C is still first class after all." A few passengers turned, holding their breath. Someone whispered, "Could be a system glitch. No one that young sits in 1A. Amara opened her handbag. She pulled out her boarding pass and held it up, calmly, clearly. "My name is Amara Collins, seat 1A. I booked it over a month ago. You're welcome to verify." Victoria didn't take it. She glanced at it for a second, then turned away, as if she'd just looked at a counterfeit handbag. The pass might be correct, but there are people who are more deserving of that seat. The words were light as air, but they hit like a slap without a hand, only status. Amara gripped the armrest tightly. She didn't react with anger, she just breathed, slow, deep. She'd heard words like that all her life. "You're good, but not experienced enough. We're looking for someone who better fits the company image. You should probably start at a more junior level." Caroline chimed in, her tone polished but barbed. "You're still young. You've got a long way to go. Seats like 1A will come. Once you have a few more..." Accomplishments. At this moment, the entire cabin became a silent courtroom. No one spoke. But every glance, every polite smile, every eye contact was a verdict. You should give it up. You don't belong here. Still, Amara sat upright. She didn't respond, didn't argue, didn't rise. But something inside her had just slipped past the line. Not everyone can sit here. But I fought to earn it. And I won't surrender it to the whispers of privilege. She looked directly at Victoria, her voice low but resolute. I don't need more time or more accomplishments to deserve this seat, ma'am. I've already paid the price. The air froze. Caroline narrowed her eyes. Victoria lifted her chin, about to speak again. But the battle had begun, and Amara, though alone, would not retreat. First-class cabin, Flight 0210, Orion Air, Seat 1A. No one sat beside Amara, yet the pressure around her was crushing. Every look from the nearby passengers was a silent sentence. Victoria Langford did not back down. She was clearly displeased that this outsider remained seated, despite her clear signals. She changed tactics. Her voice softened, no longer sharp, but dripping with the patronizing sweetness of an elder teaching the younger. I don't blame you, truly. Young people these days are given far more opportunities than we ever were. You're young, attractive, and sitting in first class. I just wanted to ask, do you truly understand what this seat represents? Amara remained silent, but her eyes shifted, no longer merely defensive. Inside her, memories sparked like flickering film reels. The nights working cafe shifts till 3 a.m. The meals of instant noodles and tap water. The interviews she was denied because she didn't fit the company culture. Seat 1A wasn't a privilege. It was the product of every minute, every hour, every rejection she'd risen from. Caroline, behind Victoria, interjected with a voice seemingly gentle. If you'd just moved to another seat, the flight would be more comfortable for everyone. No one would feel awkward. Wouldn't you agree? This was the most dangerous kind of pressure. No threats, no shouting, just friendly suggestions, wrapped in a look that clearly said, "Know your place." Amara looked at Victoria, then Caroline. She didn't attack, but her words sliced cleanly through the velvet atmosphere. I'm not sitting here because of luck, and I'm not sitting here to please anyone, except myself. A pause, not silence out of respect, but stunned disbelief that a young, brown-skinned woman without a designer bag dared to respond with a confidence money couldn't buy. Victoria pursed her lips, trying to maintain her poise, but her voice betrayed the sting. When I was your age, I wouldn't have dared dream of this seat. But I understand, times change. Apparently, anyone can sit here now. A quiet ripple spread through the cabin. A few passengers subtly nodded in agreement with Victoria. The rest stayed dangerously silent, not because they had no opinions, but because Amara was doing what they had never witnessed before, challenging a symbol of privilege without losing her dignity. Amara held her head high, no lowered voice, no outburst. She spoke just loud enough for those around to hear. Some people dream, then forget. Some people dream, then wake up and work themselves to the bone to make it real. Seat 1A doesn't belong to the past. It belongs to effort. Victoria froze. Caroline swallowed hard. An elderly passenger behind them leaned toward his wife and whispered. She didn't raise her voice, but that felt like a slap. Yes, a slap, not from a hand, not from power, but from the proud presence of someone once rejected, now refusing to bow. 8:01 a.m., first class cabin, flight 0210, Orion Air. After the simmering confrontation with Victoria Langford, the cabin atmosphere shifted from suffocating to electric. Everything was quiet, but no one was truly at ease. Now and then, eyes flicked towards seat 1A, where Amara Collins still sat, silent but unyielding. Then the silence shattered. A gentle male voice, calm but strained under pressure. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm Liam Whitfield, the chief flight attendant on this flight. May I see your boarding pass, please?" Amara handed it over. Seat 1A. Her name. A clearly printed confirmation. Liam glanced over it quickly, then hesitated. "I see. However, we have a long-time customer, a Platinum Elite member, who regularly occupies this seat. There might have been a system error during the booking." At that moment, Charlotte Vaughan, the cabin manager, appeared, her uniform crisp, heels clicking softly against the floor. She smiled, but her eyes were cold as ice. "Ms. Collins, on behalf of Orion Air, we apologize for the inconvenience. To ensure the best experience for all passengers, would you mind moving to seat 3C or 4A? Both are still in first class. And we'd like to offer you a $500 voucher for your next flight." It sounded like a suggestion, but the tone and how close she stood felt like a command. The atmosphere became unmistakably clear. You should know your place. Amara rested her hand lightly on her lap. She could feel every gaze. Some passengers silently hoped she'd accept, to avoid trouble. Others were waiting for her to give up. The atmosphere was thick, heavy with soft-spoken pressure and sideways glances steeped in prejudice. Amara Collins was still in seat 1A. She had not moved. Charlotte Vaughan, the cabin manager, lowered her head slightly and spoke with forced politeness. "Ms. Collins, we sincerely ask for your cooperation to avoid further tension. Please consider the overall harmony of the cabin." Amara looked at Charlotte, then turned to face Liam, the chief flight attendant. She tilted her head slightly, as if she were posing a question not just to them, but to the entire first-class cabin. A question no one dared to answer. If I were a 50-year-old white man in an Armani suit, sitting in the exact same seat, 1A, would you be standing here asking him to move? The first-class cabin was full, yet fell utterly silent. That question sliced through the performative politeness like a blade. Liam froze. His mouth opened, but no words came. Charlotte avoided her gaze, visibly unsettled. Victoria Langford, still sitting stiffly in 1B, like a marble statue of entitlement, shifted. Her expression cracked. Caroline Pierce furrowed her brow, clenched the armrest, and turned away. A middle-aged man in row 2 quietly lowered his newspaper. An Asian businesswoman behind Amara bowed her head slightly. An elderly white woman in row 4 gently shook her head, not at Amara, but at the entire cabin. Amara didn't flinch, she didn't erupt. She simply held her ground, with the gaze of someone who had been asked one too many times, "Are you sure you belong here?" and was now ready to answer, clearly, finally, "Forever." Charlotte whispered, voice barely audible, "You understand, this isn't about race." Amara cut in, her voice even but sharp as a scalpel. "I don't need people to say what the problem is. I just need to see who gets asked to move, and who stays seated, untouched." The cabin trembled, not because of turbulence, but because the truth had cracked through. This was no longer about a system glitch, no longer about maintaining peace. This was about privilege, and who was deemed worthy of presence. Amara glanced down at her boarding pass one more time, as if to remind herself she hadn't taken anyone's seat. She had paid for it, with sleepless nights, rejections, and countless looks of dismissal. Seat 1A. Name Amara Collins. Confirmed 1 month ago. Purpose of flight to sign a multi-million-dollar tech contract. And then she raised her head, her eyes no longer focused on Charlotte or Victoria, but on everyone in the first-class cabin. My question isn't just for the flight crew, it's for all of you. If a young woman of color, who doesn't look like the elite, sits in the seat she paid for, will she ever be left in peace? Or will she always be asked to stand, just to avoid making the people who are used to that seat feel uncomfortable? Silence. For the first time, silence didn't feel like judgment, it felt like shame. 8:12 a.m. First-class cabin, Flight 0210, New York to Los Angeles. After Amara's piercing question, no one answered. No one dared to answer. A suspended truth now loomed over the cabin. No one had been directly insulted, but everyone felt complicit. Charlotte Vaughan, the cabin manager, forced a strained diplomatic smile. Her voice faltered. "We will report this incident to our senior management. Please bear with us for a moment." Amara said nothing. She reached into her bag and took out her phone, calm, deliberate, unwavering. A single swipe. She tapped call. Every eye in the cabin turned to her. The ringing echoed. Then a deep, composed male voice answered on the other end. Darius Knight speaking. A moment of stillness. Then Amara spoke, her voice cutting clean through the fog of prejudice, word by word. "Darius, it's Amara. I'm on a Ryanair flight OA210. I've just been asked to vacate seat 1A, the seat I booked and paid for, because a Platinum Elite passenger feels I don't fit the image of someone who should sit here. I don't need privilege, I need fairness. And I believe you can help ensure that." In the cabin, the air froze. Caroline Pierce tugged at Victoria Langford's sleeve. "Who is she calling?" Victoria shook her head, but her eyes narrowed in suspicion. Darius Knight, Amara's longtime friend from university, now a board member at Orion Air, in charge of human capital strategy and cultural diversity. One of the most influential voices at corporate headquarters. On the other end of the line, Darius said only one sentence, but it sent a chill down several spines. "Amara, stay right where you are. I'll take care of this immediately, and this time it won't stop at the cabin." Amara closed her phone. She didn't smile, didn't speak again. She sat upright, eyes fixed on the window. All the gazes in the cabin, once mocking, dismissive, had now shifted to something else entirely. Fear. Victoria clenched her handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Caroline whispered, "Darius Knight. He's on the executive board. I saw his name in the internal newsletter. If she really knows him, then—" Liam Whitfield and Charlotte Vaughan rushed into the galley, urgently reaching for the internal comms. But it was already too late. At Orion Air headquarters, Manhattan HQ, at that exact moment, Darius Knight walked into an emergency meeting room. With him sat senior advisors, legal counsel, and the Eastern Division's chief operating officer, Julian Trent. Darius's gaze was sharp and commanding. Flight OA210 just had a discriminatory incident involving a young black passenger. I want action, now. No delays, no corporate memos. Julian Trent nodded. Naomi Fraser, head of corporate ethics, pulled out her credentials and declared, "I'm boarding that plane myself, And this time, we're not just resolving it. We're setting an example. 8:24 a.m., 12 minutes after the fateful phone call. The first-class cabin of Flight OA210 remained frozen in suspense. Amara sat quietly in seat 1A, unmoving, not sparing a glance at anyone, like a mountain in the middle of a storm. Liam Whitfield and Charlotte Vaughan returned to the cabin, their faces stiff and uneasy. But before they could speak, the cabin door opened. Two figures entered with decisive, echoing footsteps on the wood-paneled floor. Tailored navy suits, polished name badges. Julian Trent, Eastern Division Chief Operating Officer of Orion Air. Naomi Fraser, Head of Ethics and Passenger Standards. Their presence silenced the entire cabin. Not a single flight attendant moved. Not a single passenger dared to exhale. Victoria Langford narrowed her eyes at Naomi, seemingly recognizing her from last year's customer service summit. Caroline Pierce had already bowed her head, trembling. Julian didn't need an introduction. His voice rang out, sharp and cold. Liam Whitfield, Charlotte Vaughan, please follow us to the private conference room in the rear of the aircraft, immediately. Liam froze. Charlotte began to protest. Sir, if we could just explain. Explanations will be recorded after all actions have been reviewed in the closed session. Now, please. The two walked away in silence. The door to the private meeting room closed behind them, with the dry, final sound of justice clicking into place. The cabin hung in suspended air. Passengers looked at each other, then at Amara, then back toward the door. No one said a word, but everyone understood. This was no longer a personal misunderstanding. It had become a formal investigation by the airline. Naomi Fraser scanned the cabin, her gaze sharp as a blade. She said nothing to Amara, but with a single direct look and a slow, deliberate nod, she confirmed what no one else had dared to say. We heard you, and we are here. In the galley, behind the closed conference room door, Julian Trent laid a printed internal report on the table. We received a passenger complaint, with full evidence, a valid boarding pass, multiple witness accounts, and a direct call to a board member. I don't want excuses. I want to know, was there or wasn't there biased treatment, favoritism, and emotional coercion used to pressure a paying passenger into moving seats? Liam was sweating. Charlotte's hands trembled. There was no more smiling, no more posturing as cabin leaders. They now stood exactly where they had once forced others to stand, in the defendant's box of truth. In the cabin, Amara gently opened the small window shade. Light poured onto her face. It wasn't the light of morning, it was the first light of change. Flight OA210 was no longer just a journey from New York to Los Angeles. It had become a vessel carrying the reckoning of an entire system of privilege. And seat 1A, Amara's seat, had become a symbol of silent resistance, of a presence that refused to be erased. 8:41 a.m., emergency conference room, rear of business class. The soundproof door had long since closed, yet no one in first class dared to speak above a whisper. The air was strangely still, as if the entire plane was holding its breath. Inside the conference room, Julian Trent, eyes unwavering, placed two incident reports in front of Liam and Charlotte. I'm not asking for your feelings, I'm asking for the truth. Was a paying passenger pressured to move seats without valid cause? Was preferential treatment given because the other passenger was Platinum Elite? Charlotte swallowed hard. Liam tried to steady his voice. We were simply trying to maintain harmony in the first-class cabin. Julian cut him off, his tone ice-cold. by sacrificing the one who did nothing wrong, by silently allowing privilege to override fairness. That's not harmony. That's shielding bias. Naomi Fraser stood and retrieved footage from the first-class cabin's internal camera system. A clip played, Victoria Langford, pointing directly at Amara, clearly saying, "There's no way a black girl should be sitting in 1A. This airline is going downhill." In the footage, Liam stood nearby, saying nothing. Charlotte suggested Amara move seats without checking the booking system. Naomi turned to them, her voice soft yet thunderous in its clarity. "Silence is an action. You chose the wrong side, and now you will face the consequences." The conference room door opens. Julian and Naomi exited first. Liam and Charlotte followed behind, faces pale, steps heavy as lead. In the first-class cabin, all eyes turned. Some passengers sat upright. Victoria Langford clutched her handbag, breathing rapidly. Caroline Pierce lowered her gaze, sensing that the next strike might come for them. Julian stopped at the center of the cabin. His voice rang out like a bell of justice. "On behalf of Orion Air and the Eastern Regional Executive Board, I hereby announce Chief Flight Attendant Liam Whitfield and Cabin Manager Charlotte Vaughan are officially relieved of all duties, effective immediately. They will be escorted off Flight OA210. Reason: gross violation of service protocols, favoritism, and mishandling of a discrimination-related incident." The cabin went silent. A few mouths hung open. An older gentleman exhaled deeply and said, "Finally, someone did the right thing." Liam lowered his head. Charlotte broke into tears. Two security officers in black suits approached, silently escorting them off the plane. Before leaving the cabin, Naomi Fraser paused at seat 1A. She didn't say much. She simply placed one hand gently on the edge of Amara's seat and nodded. "Thank you. Not everyone has the courage to hold their ground when an entire cabin tries to push them out." Amara looked up at her, eyes shimmering. She nodded back, just once. And just like that, the atmosphere in the cabin changed. It was no longer the suffocating tension of prejudice, but the silent stillness of those who had just witnessed justice. Truly take flight. 9:05 a.m., first-class cabin, Flight OA210, Orion Air. The cabin remained silent in the wake of Liam and Charlotte's removal, but no one knew. The real storm was just beginning. Victoria Langford, the 55-year-old businesswoman who had entered the cabin exuding untouchable authority, now sat pale-faced, lips tightly pressed, her gaze flickering. Everyone still remembered her words moments earlier. "There's no way a black girl should be sitting in 1A." And now, that very girl was still sitting there, while those who had once looked down on her had either been suspended or humbled. Caroline Pierce, Victoria's right hand, whispered, "Vic, we should stop before this goes any further." But Victoria didn't listen. She shot to her feet, her face flushed with a mix of rage and humiliation. "I've been a Platinum Elite member for 20 years. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on this airline. And now I'm treated like some nobody because, what? A young woman made a phone call to a friend." Her voice echoed through the cabin. Some passengers looked down, avoiding her. Others glanced at Amara, their looks shifting from unease to respect. Victoria turned sharply toward Julian Trent, standing in the aisle. "You have no right. I'll sue you. I'll sue this airline. She doesn't belong here." Julian remained composed. He stepped forward slowly, eyes steady, unshaken. "Mrs. Langford, Your conduct has violated multiple policies regarding discriminatory behavior, racially charged comments, verbal abuse, and pressuring staff. All constitute grounds for the permanent revocation of your Platinum Elite status. Victoria froze. You wouldn't dare. It's not about daring, Julian replied coldly. It's about duty. Naomi Fraser, head of ethics and passenger conduct, stepped beside Julian and added, "You are now required to disembark this flight immediately. This directive comes from headquarters and is not subject to negotiation." Two security officers appeared behind her. They didn't issue threats. Their silent presence was enough. Caroline Pierce began to cry. She clutched Victoria's arm. "Vic, please, let's go. We were wrong." But Victoria remained rooted, like a shattered statue under a clear blue sky. From seat 1A, Amara Collins didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She looked at Victoria for a long moment, and then turned away. Not out of contempt, but because she had already won, with integrity and without a word. The cabin door closed behind Victoria. That soft click dash was more than the sound of a door. It was the end of an era of invisible privilege, an era where wealth, whiteness, and connections meant automatic entitlement. First-class cabin settles again. But something had shifted. No one dared look at Amara with suspicion anymore. An Asian businesswoman nodded toward her. An elderly couple whispered to one another, "That young woman, she's brave. If she were our daughter, we'd be proud." Caroline Pierce, now seated alone, slowly turned to face Amara. Her voice was shaky but sincere. "I'm sorry for standing on the wrong side." Amara didn't respond with words. She simply nodded, as if to say, forgiveness doesn't always come through language, but through the world that has just begun to change. 9:22 a.m. First-class cabin, Flight O210, Orion Air. The door had just closed behind Victoria Langford. A moment of silence swept across the cabin, as if someone had drawn the curtain on a play that had lasted decades. But this wasn't the ending. It was the rawest reveal of a dismantled system of privilege. At seat 1B, now empty, where Victoria once sat, only the faint scent of expensive perfume and the remnants of crushed arrogance remained. Caroline Pierce, her loyal assistant of 20 years, sat frozen. Her hands trembled, her face pale, no trace of the once cold woman who had looked at Amara with disdain. She turned to Naomi Fraser, whispering like someone lost, "I'm sorry. Victoria wasn't always like that. She was just hurt." Naomi didn't speak. She simply looked at Caroline, eyes sharp but filled with sorrow. Privilege doesn't create itself. It's fed by the silence of those who stand beside it. A middle-aged man in a grey suit quietly folded his newspaper. Earlier, he had nodded in agreement with Victoria. Now he straightened his tie, looked at Amara and gave a small bow, a wordless gesture of apology. Amara Collins remained seated in 1A. Her hand rested gently on her lap, eyes gazing out the window. There was no anger, no triumph, only the calm of someone who had witnessed history shift its course. A young flight attendant, who had been hiding near the back, cautiously stepped forward. She offered Amara a glass of water, her hand slightly trembling. You did something I never even dared to imagine." Thank you." Amara turned to her, gently took her hand. "It's not that I was brave. It's that I couldn't stay silent any longer." In the rear galley, now removed from service, Two former crew members, Liam and Charlotte, quietly packed their personal items, preparing to disembark under suspension. Charlotte tried to maintain composure, but couldn't hide the tears. She looked at Greg, the now dismissed chief attendant who had stood on the wrong side. We used to think we were untouchable, just because we knew how to keep VIPs happy. Greg simply shook his head, his gaze vacant. But today, one young woman just taught this entire industry a painful lesson. In the cabin, sunlight spilled through the windows, casting its glow across the boarding pass, still tucked into Amara's jacket. The words 1A, Amara Collins, stood out, like a medal that didn't need to be gold-plated. A young girl, about 10, sitting with her mother a few rows back, whispered, "Mum, I want to be strong like her." The mother smiled and brushed back her daughter's hair. "Then start by never bowing to injustice, sweetheart." The first-class cabin was quiet again, but it was no longer somber. There was no more privilege, no more silence. Only one truth remained, now clearer than ever. Seats do not define people. It is how they sit, with what purpose and with what values, that truly matters. 9:33 a.m., Flight OA210, the air after the storm. The door to first class softly closed behind the heavy footsteps of the old guard. Victoria Langford was gone, Liam and Charlotte too, but what remained wasn't an absence. It was a turning point. Seat 1A, once the epicenter of judgmental stares, now radiated a different kind of power, not from title or wealth or age, but from integrity, from courage. An elderly woman in a purple cardigan carefully stepped toward Amara. She had been one of the silent passengers earlier. Looking away, lips pressed tight when Victoria spoke. She gently placed her hand on the armrest. "Young lady, I used to think I understood what long-standing contribution meant, but today I've seen sometimes the greatest contribution is refusing to stay silent. Thank you, dear." Amara rose and gave a soft bow. "I only did what was right, what anyone could have done." Further back, a middle-aged businessman stepped out of his seat and walked over, his eyes quiet but full of respect. He didn't say much, just offered his business card, simple, clean, Ethan Zhao, Rise Equity Partners. "When you ever need a real ally, call me." Caroline Pierce, once Victoria's right hand, still sat motionless in seat 2C. At first, she couldn't bring herself to meet Amara's gaze, but after a long breath, she stood. The ice in her expression melted away. "I used to believe loyalty meant staying silent. But maybe real loyalty is knowing when to stand on the right side." Amara didn't blame her. She simply nodded. Because the greatest victory isn't silencing others. It's helping them change. Naomi Fraser returned to the cabin, now temporarily replacing the suspended chief flight attendant. She wasn't wearing a commanding uniform, nor posturing as leadership. She stood in front of seat 1A and bowed her head. Not out of rank, but out of gratitude. "Ms. Collins, you did what our entire industry should have done long ago. Not just protecting seat 1A, but standing up for those who deserve their seat, even if they're young, different, or don't have any badges on their chest." Amara gently gripped the strap of her backpack. Her eyes welled, but her smile remained calm. "I don't need anyone to apologize on my behalf. I just hope that young people like me won't have to exhaust themselves proving their worth, just to sit in the seat they earned." The cabin was quiet, but not with fear, with weight. A young man in the back row, earbuds just removed, whispered to his friend, First time I've seen someone break the unspoken rules. And didn't even have to shout. Morning light slanted through the window, casting a glow on Amara's face. No longer just the face of a passenger, but the symbol of a new generation. Not loud, but unshakable. Not seeking permission, but fully deserving. Not asking for a seat, but stepping forward and sitting down, as if she always belonged there. 10:02 a.m. aboard flight OA210, above the skies of Arizona. The plane had reached cruising altitude. Golden sunlight streamed into the first-class cabin, bathing the faces of passengers who no longer looked at Amara with prejudice, but with admiration. At the back of the cabin, Naomi Fraser, head of ethics and passenger conduct at Airline Air, walked slowly towards seat 1A. She carried no clipboard, no assistant followed. There was not a single symbol of institutional authority, only a quiet, sincere respect shown through her composed demeanor and unflinching gaze. She stopped in front of Amara and bowed gently. "Ms. Collins, I'm not here to deliver an apology on behalf of the airline. I'm here to personally thank you." Amara looked up, her eyes calm. Naomi continued, her voice soft yet unwavering. "We've trained thousands of flight attendants, but the truth is, we've trained them to serve the powerful instead of serving those with dignity." The entire cabin fell silent. Caroline lowered her head. A few passengers swallowed hard. Naomi went on, not as a manager, but as someone who had just awakened from the false dream of premium service. "From this day forward, I vow, in front of you and in front of every passenger aboard flight OA210, Airline Air will reform our entire employee training program. From now on, service will not be defined by mileage, VIP status or skin color, but by character and equal respect." Amara nodded but did not respond immediately. She glanced around the cabin, at those who had once stayed silent, those who had judged, and even those who had changed. Then she spoke, slowly, clearly. "I don't need an apology for myself. I need to see action for a generation of young people without connections or privilege, but full of dreams." A single tear slid down Naomi's cheek. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal card. Airline Air's honorary gold card, typically reserved for passengers with decades of contribution to the airline. But today she placed it into Amara's hand. "This is not a privilege, it's a promise that no matter where you fly, on any aircraft at any time, we will remember that it was you who redefined the moral standard of our industry." A soft round of applause rippled through the first-class cabin. Not loud, not forced, just hands in quiet agreement. For someone who had stood firm when everything else shook. And as Naomi walked away, leaving Amara in seat 1A, still the same seat, still the same face. This time, no one dared to question whether she belonged there. 11:20 a.m. over California airspace. Airline Air Flight OA210 began its descent. From the window of seat 1A, sunlight poured across Amara Collins's cheek, casting a quiet glow, as if the sky itself was bowing in honor of the 26-year-old woman seated there. On the tray table in front of her, a slim laptop lit up. The screen displayed a contract titled Strategic Partnership, Star Nova X Collins Consulting. A 7-figure number sat neatly in the total value line. With each click, Amara wasn't just marking a new chapter in her own career. She was opening a door for every young person who had ever been underestimated for their skin color, age, or background. From the row behind, a middle-aged woman, the same one who had once cast her a skeptical glance, gently placed her hand on Amara's shoulder as she walked past. "Thank you for making me rethink who I am, and congratulations, young lady." Amara turned and nodded, not with pride, but with the warm gaze of someone who knew she had refused to bow in vain. At the back of the cabin, Caroline Pierce, former assistant to Victoria Langford, sat quietly, hands clasped tightly in her lap. No longer sharp, no longer at the side of power, just a woman alone with her conscience at a crossroads. She looked at Amara as if seeing a mirror, reflecting everything she wished she'd had the courage to do. In the Orion Air Operations Office in Los Angeles, an official email had just been sent. Subject line: RE Policy Reform, Lessons from OA210. Contents included retraining the entire flight crew on fairness and anti-bias, eliminating all unspoken privilege policies based on elite status, age, or personal connections. All complaints involving race, age, or social status to be escalated to the highest level. And finally, in bold, it was the unwavering resolve of passenger Amara Collins that sparked this transformation. Media began calling it the 1A incident, Justice's touchdown in the sky. News shows, talk programs, and social media forums flooded with the image of a young woman, sitting firm, as an entire cabin of privilege shook around her. 1 week later, on national television, the host asked Amara, "Do you think of yourself as a hero?" Amara simply smiled gently. "I didn't stand up to be a hero. I just didn't want to sit down for injustice." She continued, "If someone out there, an 18-year-old girl from a low-income neighborhood or a college student without powerful relatives, is wondering whether they deserve space in the room, I hope they remember that day. Seat 1A doesn't belong to any one kind of person. It belongs to anyone brave enough to stay seated in the place they've earned." The journey ended, but an era had begun. An era of a new generation. One that doesn't ask for permission to be seen, doesn't bow because they're different. From that day forward, every time an Orion airplane takes off, the safety video ends with a small line on screen: "Thank you for believing in justice, just as Amara Collins once did." OA210, a flight once considered ordinary, had become a landmark in history. Not because of its route, not because of its class, but because one passenger refused to stand up, so that millions more could walk in. Sometimes history isn't written in loud chants or waving flags. It begins with something much smaller. With refusing to stand up when someone tells you that you should give up your seat. Amara Collins didn't shout. She didn't blame anyone, didn't demand power, didn't threaten with titles or authority. She simply sat there in the seat she had earned through intellect, perseverance, and years of unshakable effort. And because of that, an entire system had to stand up and look at itself in the mirror. Her story isn't only for those who have faced discrimination or been underestimated. It's for all of us. For anyone who has ever quietly asked themselves, "Do I deserve to be here? Does my dream have a place in a world built for privilege?" The answer, as Amara proved, is yes. But it's not handed to you. You have to sit down, hold your ground, and refuse to leave, even when every eye around you wants you gone. And if one day you find yourself in that moment, in a boardroom, at a conference, or simply in a seat that others think you don't belong in, remember this: you don't need permission. You just need to know you walked in and you deserve to stay. Because from Amara Collins, we didn't just learn how to reclaim justice. We learned how to hold our place with pride. and with an entire generation behind us. Thank you for listening to this story. If you've ever been misjudged, ever been told you're too young, or felt excluded simply because you were different, then this story is yours. And seat 1A might just be yours too.